Hi everyone, welcome back to the Iris Pod. I'm delighted to be joined today by Sheree Atcheson, who is a multi-award-winning diversity and inclusivity executive, has spoken about the subject on a number of occasions, and a keynote speaker, also contributor to Forbes. Sheree, welcome to the Iris Pod.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Was that a good enough introduction for you there? Maybe you can tell us in your own words what your world is and why you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Sheree, and I'm listed as one of the UK's most influential women in technology. And I've, like you've said, won lots of awards for my work across the world. I'm also a published author of the book Demanding More: Why Diversity and Inclusion Don't Happen, and actually what you can do about it. And my work is really focused on unearthing privilege through data points, understanding people analytics in a much more nuanced way, and making sure that we set very clear goals on how we do things. My background, I used to be a software engineer, so I take a very technical view to the creations of my strategies, and I like to think that's why I've been so successful at it so far.
Well, let's start there, because that's actually a really interesting kind of start point for us, and that's software engineering, both in terms of women and in terms of people of color and other ethnic minorities. Why in particular is this something where it's mainly male dominated? Because you're breaking the mold with that. Are you seeing a trend and a shift towards more women being involved in that sort of role profile?
I think when we look at the shift, yes, there is certainly a change and a positive change when we start to see the attraction of more women into technology. One of the organisations I sit on the board of is Women Who Code, which is the world's largest non-profit globally dedicated to women in tech. When we have, I think, over 300,000 members and a presence in almost every city. And when I started with that organisation 7-8 years ago now, we had 3,000 global members, and we're now 300,000. So there's a clear attraction of women to the industry, but less focusing on the attraction, actually the retention of that group through organizations changing how they hire, how they promote, what they deem as successful and not, and actually flexibility to make sure those things work. There is still quite a long way to go, because we see at the lower, more middle grades, we have higher representation increasing, but actually at the most senior levels, there's not a lot changing, and certainly not enough changing. And that's where we know, when we think of senior leadership, that it's really important that we target in how we attract people into those roles, how we support people up into those, and why at the same time.
Do you think we'll dig a bit more into the kind of leveling of the playing field that potentially hybrid working, virtual working can set, but do you think that just for this particular point around software engineering, do you think it opens up a new career opportunity for a group of people that maybe previously wouldn't have been able to do that? I'm thinking, working mums and that kind of demographic.
Yeah, I mean, I think when flexible working is done with nuance, it works better than anything that's static, because people as a whole are not static. What people's needs are not monolithic. And previously, and very often, we have workplaces that treat people in that way, that are very monolithic. You come in, these are your core hours, this is how it works, this is when you can leave, this is when you can't leave, and so on and so forth. And actually that doesn't work for people with different requirements, different caring responsibilities, and whatever it might be. The useful thing with flexible working is that it allows people to fit work around life as opposed to life around work. And that's what ultimately our goal should be. We shouldn't be here to try and impose things onto people's lives, but rather recognizing that when they have flexibility, when they can prioritize their time in a better way, they work better, they collaborate better, because they're happier, they're more content. And it's very clear that flexible working is doing that. But what's really important about flexible working is that it itself is flexible, that we're not going, completely remote, completely in office, but allowing people to choose what works for them, because some people will prefer to be in office, some will not. But again, the choice should be with the person within reason.
What are the barriers to inclusivity and some of these challenges that we're working so hard to address? potentially with hybrid and virtual working. I can certainly see in a world where we're more tuned into our mental well-being and connectivity to others, that whilst this presents incredible opportunities for people to work in a different pattern that suits their home lives, their family, certainly this could be a ticking time bomb on some of these issues that are connected to mental health, mental well-being.
I think it's a balance here, because actually I have the view that certainly a better flexible working is better for mental health and better for well-being, because of the ability to shift priorities in a way that works for you. I also think it's really, really important to recognise that disabled people, for example, have been asking for years to have flexibility with working, and businesses have said, we can't do that. And then all of a sudden we have a global pandemic, and suddenly, yes, we are able to do that. We are able to have conferences remotely and so on that are more inclusive from an accessibility perspective as well. What I think is important here is that we recognise that there is merit to being flexible and being remote, and there is merit to coming together when it makes sense. The key point there is that, does it make sense for me, for example, as a senior leader in my organisation to come and sit in an office between 9 to 5 with my headphones in, having calls around the world, which would mean I would sit on a train for 30 minutes in the sweltering heat, for example. That would make no sense. But actually, once a month, does it make sense to me to travel somewhere, for example, in EMEA or in the States, to collaborate with the other leadership teams? Yes, that would make sense. And it's about really maximising the outputs that people get when they come together, as opposed to just, well, I want you to come in and I want you to sit at this desk because we paid for this office space and I want to be able to see that you're working, as opposed to recognising that we should trust the people we hire. And if we don't trust them, then we have probably made a mistake, or we're not equipped to be managers. And that's a very different conversation.
Is this, I certainly think that the kind of archaic thought process of being able to see your team was forced upon leadership. How much of this is a leadership issue in terms of that trust in employees? And kind of a second part to that, how do employees that want that trust kind of show it and have that empathy back up towards their management? Yeah,
I mean, I think you've already kind of summed it up by saying empathy. It's whenever I work a lot with other leaders, the main thing I ask people to have is empathy. And people always say, oh yeah, I'm really empathetic, but actually most of the time they're not, because they're only empathetic to people they identify with, not the other people that maybe have very different needs, very different lifestyles, whatever it might be. And that's where we get this disconnect. Do I think that the problem with around trusting employees to not need to be bums in seats is with leadership? Yes, I do. Because if you operate in that kind of archaic, almost legacy way, then middle managers will do the same thing. And then we just continue this time bomb, or this circle effect that never changes. Now, what I would love people to do when it comes to trusting people is, one, if you hire someone who's got the skills that you need for the job and so on, what's really important here is expectations are set. And expectations must be clear, because otherwise, if I, as a senior leader, expect something, but I don't tell you as the person who's operationalizing that, then how can you ever meet my expectations? And then I won't trust you, because actually you haven't done what I thought. But the problem here is me, because I didn't take what was in my head and put it out through my mouth. So what I ask people to do is be very, very clear on deliverables, and also be very, very clear on actually the timeframes that we're working to. You know, do we need this done within the quarter? Is it within a month? Is it a very, very quick turnaround? So everybody can work to the same guidelines. And that's where I think trust really happens. Trust isn't broken until something doesn't happen, unless someone has a very fair reason for it. But ultimately what I'm saying to people is, treat people like adults. You know, treat everybody like an adult. We're not children here in the workplace. So I don't need someone, and you don't need me breathing down your neck, because actually that will demoralize you. That will stop collaboration, because you won't trust me to come with any problems as your leader. And then we're just in a vicious cycle.
I completely agree. And I think, you know, it was a big learning curve, but more than anything, it proved that really we are capable of working in this way. Because you're someone in software and technology close to your heart, do you think that the technology is is fully there yet to really cater to this hybrid and virtual working pattern, because I think software and the platforms that we use are also a key factor in being inclusive and making sure that systems, infrastructure and tools that we need are available to all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two sides to that, because I think technology has allowed us to pivot almost overnight in the way we did when was it, like March 2021, when everything kind of just blew up and everything kind of changed. And because of those technologies that we had, whether it's video conferencing, whether it's streaming services and so on, we were able to pivot quite quickly. But the key thing about it now is that how do we ensure that those technologies are accessible for people with different needs? Also, how are we making sure as team collaborators, as managers and so on, that we're using those tools to the best of their ability? Very often, we click a button, we put our video on, we start to speak. We maybe don't think, actually, should I put transcriptions on? Should I be recording this? Should I be using the different closed captions that are available? And that's why I think when we use technology to pivot and to, I wouldn't say replicate, but mimic some of the in-person experience that we have, we really need to know the platforms well. Do I think those platforms can get better? Of course I do. I also think when you think of barrier to entry, to do video calls, you have to have good Wi-Fi, you have to have a safe, quiet space to do that and so on. But that's where that hybrid piece comes in, around being able to go into the office, organisations supporting staff that maybe can't afford those things with stipends so they can afford those things, etc., etc. So it's all about that flex, but also recognising that as a business, if we want people to be at home, we also have to be able to facilitate what that means. And that means all of the boring stuff, like setting up admin and setting up, an office space and all that too.
I think it's something we've talked about on this podcast a number of times. Again, there was this kind of funny trend when the lockdown first happened. It's like, show your office and, show your background. And actually, I felt like a lot of people would be incredibly uncomfortable sharing that, because we do a lot of work in the contact center space, for instance, which is a job type that lends itself to, maybe a younger demographic, multi-generational households, and you don't have a dedicated office. It's the end of your bed, or it's like the kitchen worktop at best. How much do you think companies, as they, if you think about how much it costs them to put a desk in an office building, should they be investing more in the actual, not just the tech and the platforms they use, but actually the surroundings, the actual place that they sit and maybe work 8 or more hours a day?
Well, yes, I don't think I'm aware of companies, if there are, they would need to change that. But certainly I know in all of the companies I've worked with, since all of this happened, and even before that, if you're setting up a home office, there should be a stipend to do so, excuse me, to make sure that people are working safely, firstly, because you have to have safety involved in all of this. And in a way that works for them. And I think when you talk about, turning on your background, it's one of the things I talk about quite a lot, because of the privilege that there is to be comfortable in doing that. Studies have shown, which I think are really interesting, that in a study of over, I think it was 71,000 students across the UK, at every single stage of the recruitment process, those from higher socioeconomic backgrounds are more comfortable in every stage of the process. And actually those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds were dropping out statistically higher at live video stage than anybody else. And that was ultimately because, if you think about it, firstly, to do a video interview, maybe you have a laptop or, a phone or something that has a phone in it, or a camera in it. You have Wi-Fi or you have 4G that you can connect to. You have a safe, quiet space, but also you have time. And I want us to think about the impact of time here. Can I take a video interview if I want to at any time? Yes, I'm a senior leader. My calendar is my own. If I was in shift work, I can't do that. Let's say I work in Tesco between my shift of 8 to 8, and I have to be there. You have to clock in and out of your time. It's very, very specific. And then if we think of the overlap here for people from poorer backgrounds, typically are more regularly in shift work, etc., and also industrial work. So that's when we think about here the impact of, let's say, when you're at home and we join a meeting together, Tom, and you're like, oh, we'll turn on video today. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But somebody else doesn't. And one of my biggest pet peeves is if someone joins a call and they don't have the video on, and I don't care about that. But someone else is like, oh, Sheree, I can't see you. Turn on your video. I'm like, no. If I have it off for a reason, we should respect that. Now, and that's where I think, I guess, like ways of working and how we work together is really important. Everything I do is about providing clarity so everybody is on the same page. And if we don't do that, then we again, these mismatched expectations. I have my video on all of the time because I'm entirely comfortable with that. Other people are not comfortable with that, and that's entirely fine too. But the key part here is the empathy and the understanding that actually not everybody has this lovely office that I have that's nice and quiet, until hopefully my 2 dogs do not start to bark. But bar that, it's
we can't
good.
hear them. We can't hear them. That's why we built this piece
Perfect.
of technology.
Perfect. That's because my husband is also like keeping them in another room far, far away from me, just in case.
It's funny, actually, it reminded me of that story, which was pretty sad, really, which was a director, I think, of a film or a theatre show, and he was doing auditions, and an actor appeared on the Zoom call,
this.
and
he was slagging off his house.
And he was slagging. He said, "Oh, what a sad little apartment! Look at it with a TV on the wall. It's so tragic." And the actor said, I can hear you. You're not actually on mute." And it was quite. That was actually a key moment, I thought, where it was like how patronising and that is a different kind of inclusivity. My home. Where can I afford to live? I want this job so I can afford maybe to buy somewhere better, or rent somewhere better. So it's all very interesting. You touched on a point, and I just wanted to ask you about your article, I think, in Forbes, which was about good intentions are not enough to create inclusive or safe tech. I found it quite a fascinating read. Talk to us a little bit about what that actually means.
I think for me, very often we have people spinning up new technologies. We have, I think, a generation, my generation included, that are very entrepreneurial. And that means that we have new ideas bouncing off the walls and so on. And then we think, let's make it. Let's just make it. Let's just get it out there. Let's see what happens. Without the recognition that, one, we really have to consider different perspectives and the needs of others when we do that, and two, that safe technology is key. Now, where that article came from was when the war and the invasion started from Russia into Ukraine. We saw a few MIT, Stanford students in the US spin up like a platform where Ukrainian folks could be paired with people in other countries like the UK, like the States and so on. But there was no checks involved. So it was like, oh, I want to do something to help. I want to pair people. But one, it's more than likely that women and children are going to be leaving. And those are the most vulnerable groups, especially right now. And two, that not everybody on that site is there with the right intentions. But there was no checks. There was no passport checks, no nothing. So literally I could sign up and I could say that I'm actually Tom and I'm doing this, that, and I have this house and I have everything else. And actually, maybe I'm not Tom whatsoever, I'm Sheree, and it's very different. And we see that quite a lot when we have new technology. One of the biggest problems I have with the tech industry is the overwhelming ego that exists when it comes, especially from founders. Because what that tends to do, as everybody will know, ego blindsides you. It stops you seeing actually what's outside of your own four walls in your head, because you assume what you're doing is the best thing. Because I came up with it and I'm very, very intelligent, therefore it must be right. And what I would really love founders to do, intelligent founders, let's say, to take a moment, take a step back and think, one, do I need to do this? Are there organizations maybe that just need funding, that already exist, that have the movements there? And this was an example where they did. Or two, do I need to spend longer than just rushing something that could directly really, really harm people? We see this a lot when it comes to new AIs and bias in data sets and so on. And that's where this slowing down is really important. When people ask me what my job is, I always say it's to put friction into decision making. At its most basic level, it's to stop people making decisions like that. It's to get you to take a second. But in technology, it's a fast moving industry. It's very agile. People are rolling out things all the time without the real implications of safety, of security, of accessibility, for example. And to be very honest, thinking about it after you've had backlash just isn't good enough. It's not good enough, and yet we so regularly accept it.
Yeah, I guess mentality of making a quick buck, exploiting a situation for financial gain in many ways. But we have to be better. We had a team day last week where we got everybody to talk about their personal values and how they aggregate up to our company values. You'll be glad to hear that empathy was up there as one of the top points. But actually, there was a good conversation around accessibility of our website, of our technology, tool tips. Do we make this something that's incredibly easy to use as a platform, irrespective of whatever kind of visual or other kind of impairments that you might have. So it's vitally important. To just flip to the messaging, you also wrote in Forbes about inclusive marketing, and I wanted to just dig into that one as a kind of marketer at heart. What tell us a little bit more about that and what that means, because I think sometimes inclusive marketing is right, have we got a kind of quorum of black people, brown people, etc. Yeah, tick, done. Tell us your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when we talk, before we even talk about inclusive marketing, when I talk about my diversity and inclusion work, it's not just the stuff that we do within, let's say, HR, people and culture and so on. It's how we create technologies, it's how we create our marketing. And one of the biggest pitfalls in the industry is that it's not tackled in that way. And so that's why I wrote that blog, and I did a keynote on it in Sweden as well. What I think is really important about inclusive marketing is really, really recognizing who your audience is, not just making an assumption that it will fit the masses because we say so, but actually what I think is really important here is the user testing that goes on beforehand, the user research, but also really understanding the niche that our products may have in a way to people that we just maybe have not considered. I know a great example is whenever Gillette did a campaign for trans men when they started to use razors, because it wasn't something that they ever had to do before. And then there was a lovely ad where a dad was teaching his son who had just transitioned to how to shave for the first time, and he's in his late 20s clearly. So it's thinking, actually, other people are using this product. Are we marketing to them with our standard adverts, or actually do we need to do more? I think the other key thing here is seeking those perspectives before we make decisions. I think in any leadership remit, and I sit in leadership myself, it's very easy for us to assume what we do as a collective is the right thing. Most of the time that may be the case, of course, because you have the experience, the expertise, and you would assume that would lend yourself to thinking in the way that makes the most sense. But that doesn't mean we can't be wrong. And that's why I really ask people to seek those different perspectives before you make decisions. One, because it means you create a better solution. But two, when you seek them after, it costs you much more money to change something. And especially in marketing, let's say you push out a big campaign and it just falls flat. One of the examples I always think of was that advert, I think it was for Pepsi, with one of the Kardashians or the Jenners or something, and she's giving a Pepsi to stop the riots that are happening on the roads, and it just get raked because it's like, who did you ask who said that was a good idea? And you've also completely undermined the huge issue with police violence, for example, in America that's happening, by saying that our Kardashian could stop it with a Coke can or a Pepsi can, because nobody thought actually think for 2 seconds that maybe we should do something different. So again, it's about friction before decision making, seeking different perspectives, and recognizing that our tools, our solutions, our products maybe have users that we've never thought about, and we won't think of them until we really delve down into what customers want.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was horrible.
It was Pepsi or Coke. I did a shudder. It's like you don't always have to insert your brand into every piece of kind of social shift for virtue signaling
purposes. That's exactly it. It's virtue
quite
signaling
obnoxious
in that case, and it fell very, very, very flat.
Yeah. Awful. Quick, let's move on because I'm feeling quite icky about that one. Let's go back to the beginning. And actually, another one of your contributions, I think, with Deloitte in the UK was about, should we be teaching children to code? And that kind of if you think about how we get more women in tech and diversity in tech, is that where it starts? But is it also treading a fine line with children that are incredibly, they're like sponges at that age, so they can get incredible benefit, but also there's a nature where kids lock themselves away and just spend hours on their computers anyway. So what's the right way to tread this path?
What I think is important, so I think there's two points to that. The first one is, do I think working with school children, schoolgirls, for example, is one of the avenues to get more women in technology? Yes, but also we have to do the pieces where we really support women when they come into the industry, where we challenge the bias, we remove discriminatory measures that do exist, and so on. But if we focus in on the younger children and the young girls, what I really want people to have, and young girls to have, is at least have exposure to some of these things we're talking about, like coding and so on, so they can at least decide if they don't like it themselves. What I don't want is for people to make the assumption that people won't like something based on their gender identity, because that's obviously very, very stupid when you say something like that. You cannot make assumptions and stereotypes in that way. And for me, what I think makes sense is that when we think of coding, we think of this as a skill set. We think of this as an opener to different careers, to problem solving, to analytical thinking, and so on. That is very, very useful for many careers because of the type of way it makes you think and of the type of mindset that you get into when you work in that kind of field. Now, I think when we give young girls the opportunity, whether it's through like Scratch or MIT App Inventor or even Minecraft, I think what's really, really powerful with that is that they see technology in a way that's different to what is just being lambasted at them all of the time, that it's very boyish, for example, it's very masculine and so on. For me personally, one of the reasons I became a software engineer, and I grew up in the 90s, so I'm 31 now, was that I randomly had a cousin who was also a software engineer, who then, whenever we would go to his house, and he was maybe 10 years older than me, maybe 11 years older than me, he was coding. And then when he had a job and I was starting to do my GCSEs and my A-levels, I had exposure to the work he was doing and so on. Now, if I hadn't have had that, would I maybe have chose computing for A-level, computer science, university and so on? I don't think I would have, because actually I wouldn't have ever really considered it. So I was very, very lucky. I had that direct exposure to decide whether I liked it or not. What I think is really important is that other young girls, people that aren't represented in the industry, people from poor backgrounds and so on, have that exposure so they have the same access to opportunities that some other people have and some people don't.
Yeah, I think it's, I would just think about some of the roles that we've been hiring into over the last year or so. And obviously, we're a software company, so we have a lot of those roles. It's quite challenging also as a recruiter to see the profiles and just think, wow, I'm trying to put my best foot forward here and consider diversity, but this is the selection of applicants that I have for this role, and they're all incredibly talented, but they're all white men. It's a challenge the other way. How do you manage that as a company recruiting when that's the people that are applying? It's kind of how do you make sure you're thinking about it, but also not hiring just to inject diversity.
We shouldn't just do that. So I think there's three things that I want people to do in that scenario. The first thing is I really want you to understand and delve into where your job applications are getting to. What kind of pools are they getting to? Are they actually getting to these different, for example, women in technology, or is it just we put it on the website, we put it on LinkedIn, for example, and those who follow us will click through, who are the majority of people that follow us? And then we tend to get an answer. What I think is really important for that point is thinking about the different communities you can help use to get exposure to your jobs. Organizations like Women Who Code, for example, that have job boards, that have exposure and members all over the world that will be much more likely to click through a job if it's, I guess, almost associated with an organization that shows you're supporting women in tech. The second thing that's really important is before you even do that is reviewing that job in the first place. so many times I get people coming to me saying, we're not getting anyone applying for this senior developer job. I don't understand why. We put it on this job board and so on and so forth. But actually the job description is riddled with like masculine language, very almost aggressive language, things that don't resonate with a lot of people, many men included as well. And actually what we want to do is be very neutral. We can very much say that we have a fast-paced environment without saying that you have to be a rock star to be in it. You know, I'm very, very good at my job. Would I describe myself as a rock star? Probably not, because that sounds like the most cringe thing I think I could say. And then the third thing I want people to do is to really work on how you train interviewers. Very often when you get to a certain level, we assume that, okay, you're at a senior level, so you should be fine to interview people. But actually, have we trained those people on interviewing, or are we making an assumption? And assumptions are riddled with bias. So what I tell people to do is I mandate interviewer training for those groups of people. Anyone that's involved in hiring or interviewing, they must be acutely aware of good interviewing practices, how to listen properly, how to ask the right questions, how to challenge the top 6 biases that exist in hiring, and so on. And I think what's important about that is we then can have a consistent understanding of what good interviewing means for company X. Without that, it's very unlikely that you'll get people in. And I guess the last piece very quickly is practicing the principle of patience. It's very easy for us to hire very quickly, especially in tech with homogeneous groups, of course. Where we can, I ask people to just give that bit more time when you do these other things. It won't happen overnight. It's going to take time, especially with senior leadership. You know, do I want you to hire the best person for the job? Yes. Do I want you to make sure that you've widened the talent pool enough so we can be confident we've got the best person for the job, not just the best person that's in our immediate network? And by doing that, what I tend to ask organizations to do is that for senior leadership, where you have sort of it's less numbers, for example, is that before you hire any other senior leader, you commit to interviewing at a second stage. So past, the first sort of, hiring manager interview, that before you make a decision that you have at least a certain number of people from underrepresented backgrounds at that stage, because that forces you to at least widen the pool enough to decide, have we went through enough different candidates to see, is this the best person? Sometimes the best person will be that person in your network. Okay, but I want us to be very, very confident that that's the case before we make a decision. Because then when we talk about changing our diversity demographics, what we're really talking about then is succession planning and not hiring. And that's a whole other conversation.
That's really sound advice. Thank you for us here and for anyone who tunes into the podcast. Sheree, we're pretty much out of time here. I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite bit of tech at the minute? What's your favorite piece of software?
Oh, that's a good question. I think what's changing
your life right now?
I guess it's probably quite boring. But one of the things that I really have always liked, because I've always been very interested in music, and I've always, from a very young age, because my dad was always very interested in music. And I grew up in the 90s when, you used to have, the videos that you had to put the pencil in to rewind and stuff like that. And then we got CDs. And then we got things like Spotify and stuff like that. And for me, even still, things like Spotify really change how I work, because it really, really allows me to hone in on certain moods that I have and so on. But actually, one of the favorite things that I have in Spotify right now is their blend function, which allows me, so my partner also has Spotify, and it brings together the music we both like. And I find it one of those things that, I don't know, I just think it's a very, very nice feature, and it allows me to kind of have almost like a conversation with him, even when he's not in the same room as me. So that's one of the things that I'm using a lot at the moment. Don't know if that counts, but let's go with that.
It does.
Yeah,
I love it.
Good.
I didn't know that was a feature, actually. That's good, because it's all about discovery, music discovery. Love it. Sheree, thank you so much. Your book, Demanding More, is available, I assume, from Amazon and other bookstores. If people want to get in touch with you and discover more about how to bring the important factor of diversity in the workplace and other aspects of inclusivity to their workplace, what ways can they find you? If
you go to ShereeAtcheson.com, you'll find everything about me, probably more than you ever want to know. And I'm also obviously on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And I would love to hear from anybody too.
Well, it's been great talking to you on the Iris Pod. Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll speak again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Tom.
Thanks.